The world is saved. The living room's dark save for light being cast from the big TV screen and the imminent sunrise that's teasing the one starry sky with whispers of morning.
Hey, George.
Hey, Lions, how goes it?
It's going good, man. We made it. We did, 1 year.
Un año, man. Just one full, like one full Earth passing around the sun, man.
Yes. Although all of our hard credibility has been undone by un año.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know where that came from. My Spanish is remedial at best.
Mistakes were made.
Yeah.
But this is exciting because we started our very first game. We technically launched with 2 games, but let's not nitpick. Our very first game we played for Nostalgia Goggles was Super Mario World, arguably one of the greatest Super Mario games ever made.
Well, arguably, but I don't know who would argue against that. Like, I mean, it'd be one of those things where you could do it, but the moment that somebody said, yeah, I just didn't like Super Mario World too much, it's like, I don't think we're ever going to be close friends.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this conversation is over now and for all time. So we thought as a way to like bring the first year of Nostalgia Goggles to a close, we would come back full circle, and we have played Super Mario Brothers, the OG NES game.
Yep.
And it's almost kind of startling how similar they are. Like, and not in a bad way, but there's a formula there that they rock hard.
Well, I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I mean, I think that that's kind of one of the things that, not to reveal to our audience, in advance of the end of the episode, what we thought about this game that's critically acclaimed and has lasted through the ages. It's like somebody walking up to you being like, hey, physics professor, what do you think of math? It's like, oh, man, math.
Me and math, we're like this.
But that's what makes Super Mario World a good game and a good sequel, is that they didn't just go back and completely retool the entire game. They took all of the existing fun and mechanics and things that worked, and then they added more stuff onto it that wasn't just designed by Accretion, where they just kept throwing new, like Pokemon's become, where now there's like shinies. I don't even know what. I mean, I know I just sound like old man George, but I don't even know what that is.
No, it does crack me up when people talk about Pokemon, because that is the perfect example of a franchise that has had to continue to pile game mechanics on, right?
Yep.
And not to just stop what we're supposed to be talking about to crap all over Pokemon, but let me crap all over Pokemon. Every time a new Pokemon game comes out, the internet loses their freaking minds, and I'm like, oh man, I kind of, as a gamer, I feel a little bad that I missed the Pokemon craze. And then all you have to do is read one review or look at 2 paragraphs on GameFAQs.com. It's just I cannot jump into this part of it, right? And I'm not willing to go back to the Game Boy. I know I'm not willing to, because I tried. I couldn't finish it. So it's just that part of gaming and pop culture is just essentially cut off for me. And I'm okay with it because I have Super Mario Brothers.
Is true. And that's the thing. And so, going back and playing this game, I think that the thing that I pulled from it, and we'll go into it in every section of the game, but to kind of lead into our critique, is the thing that I pulled from it is there are some things that this game does that other games have built upon and refined, but that they did where you're like, oh, this is kind of what started it, or what it started as, So it's kind of like seeing a perfect sphere now, but being like, oh, okay, so originally it was like a square, and then they cut a few more sides into it, and now it's a sphere. But to see the square, you're like, oh, okay, so this is what they started with, which I thought was pretty fascinating, pretty neat.
I agree. And before we jump right into it, do you have specific Nostalgia Goggles for this? And the reason I ask is, I think anyone who plays video games, or even is just aware of video game culture, Super Mario Brothers is so in your damn face all the time. It's woven into everything. They use the music and the sound effects in everything. If you've played any of the newer games, like Super Mario Odyssey has a ton of 2D throwback stuff. There's just like the Scott Pilgrim movie has a bunch of Super Mario sound effects. Like if you are aware at all that this game exists, it's hard to be away from it. So I'm just kind of curious, like, do you have specific memories of being a child and playing this that you can separate from just Super Mario Brothers as part of pop culture?
Kind of. I mean, and this story is actually not so much about Super Mario or Super Mario Brothers, the game itself, playing it, but one of my literally what? No,
is it about
God, no. God, no. Just, I mean, do you kill yourself or do I kill myself? Like, because I don't think we can both exist anymore.
I assume it's a murder suicide.
Yeah. No, which was because this was like, the game I got with my NES, right? This, although to be fair, I think I had the This/Duck Hunt game.
Oh yeah, I don't think that version of Super Mario Brothers was any different though, so I say it's the same.
Yeah, I replaying it now, I couldn't tell you any differences, but what I do remember was my mom, bless her heart, desperately struggling with the hardware, trying to get it to plug into our big old TV. Because remember, it had those and you'd know what they are, but those old cables that screwed into the back.
Oh yeah,
cable into that cable, so that you could have cable, but you had to make sure it was on channel 3. And yeah.
Oh man, I don't remember what that thing was called, but those were dark times.
They were.
When you had to have an electrical engineering degree just to hook up your video games.
Yep. Yeah. So I remember that whole situation, especially because at one point my mom was like, I don't know if this is happening, this. Yeah, because I was so excited about it, but then, got it and then got to play it. And so then the rest of it is just, it's hard for me to separate out when or where or how I played it. But I remembered the first time, the thing that started it all, because that was my first gaming system, man. This is what started it all.
Yeah. So I have an older brother, and my father was into computers when he was younger, man. So I think they had an Atari and a ColecoVision or something in the house. And I mean, that vastly predates me. And then my older brother got a Nintendo when it was new. So he was 5 or 6. And I was just around, but I mean, I was a 1-year-old. Right. But the thing is, that meant that the minute I was old enough to put my hands on that controller, it had already been around me literally as long as I could remember and longer. So I don't have the memory of opening the Super Nintendo on Christmas morning or for my birthday or, however, a lot of kids from that era have it. It has always been. So, when I think back to Super Mario Brothers, and I think we also had the combo cartridge like you had. I don't think we had that and Duck Hunt separately, because I don't remember Duck Hunt existing on its own. I think you had to do the combo thing.
I mean, at least that's all I remember. Is I remember, playing Mario and then, honestly using the gun that came with Duck Hunt independent of the Duck Hunt game.
Yeah,
more often than not.
Quite a bit more.
And I could not have articulated it at the time, but playing Duck Hunt, I just remember feeling somehow mildly alone that my one ally in this endeavor was openly mocking me.
Yeah, he hated you. He hated you so much.
So I didn't play that one a whole lot. I played the Mario side of it a lot more. Because at least I knew I was alone in that game. I was me versus the world, as opposed to, no, man, I'm just going to go get these ducks for you. You suck.
And that's exactly the thing, is my memories of playing Duck Hunt are mostly negative, because it's an angry, you're shooting and there's this stupid dog laughing at you, and the ducks move entirely too fast. And it's just I remember playing that as a very small kid because of how frustrating it was. But I actually don't have a lot of clear memories of playing Mario. And that's kind of why I'm sure I was playing it at the same time when I was 2, 3, 4 years old, because it has always been I can't remember ever having not had played it. My earliest memories of playing Mario are playing Mario again. So I must have already played it.
So now this actually is tangentially related. So let's not follow this rabbit hole too far, but no. So I think that you could literally liken it to your literacy, which is to say that not really being able to remember a time when you were completely illiterate, you can't remember a time when you weren't playing video games.
Correct.
So, and that's interesting because that affords you something that the game industry sometimes overlooks, which is game literacy, in the sense that you are versed in game literacy the same way that you are versed in normal literacy. And so therefore to take somebody who's brand new to video games and then plop them down into video games now, it'd be like having somebody read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and they've never even read Hop on Pop, you know?
No, I agree completely. And this is something we've run into time and time again, where like when you get up to like the Super Nintendo era, you have good developers and bad developers, whereas in the Nintendo era and back, like, you know, arcade games and Atari games and stuff, like everyone was still figuring it out, right? So by the time you got to Super Nintendo era, there were developers that were smart enough to say, hey, this might be the first video game anyone has ever played, so we should be thoughtful about how we teach them to play the game. Whereas in the Nintendo era, they were probably assuming like, oh, anyone who's going to play a Nintendo surely has been to an arcade before. Why would they buy a Nintendo if they've never been to an arcade? So like there were, you know, you can't really blame them in hindsight for making the decisions they made. But and there's lots and lots of gushing to be had about teaching mechanics in this game. But we'll get to all of that, and we'll start with visuals like we always do.
Yes. So to visuals, I hated them. They were awful. No,
some of the worst graphics in gaming. Some of the absolute worst. I mean, a guy with a mustache and overalls, like, totally unbelievable.
I mean, come on. What is this, 1980?
5.
But no. I mean, of course, the visuals are. I mean, they're NES. They're NES graphics. So I mean, there's only so much you can do as far as like, I guess resolution. But I mean, as far as the visuals go, I thought that visuals for the sake of visuals, very pleasing, enjoyable. There was nothing that like, it's kind of difficult to just talk about visuals for the sake of visuals because everything the game does with its visuals are in service to the mechanics, Yeah,
I can't think of a single time there's something on screen like, look at this thing we can just even in modern Mario games, they never say like, oh, we're going to just flex our graphics processing muscle and show you this amazing visual. Like, that's not what it's about. And it certainly was not about that at this time.
And not to, because we generally try to avoid referencing other episodes, but it's the scars are still fresh in my mind from the Home Alone game that we played, where we said we could not, I think this is a great juxtaposition, because in that one we said we could not separate the visuals from the gameplay because the visuals were so atrocious that they couldn't help but impact gameplay. And this one, the visuals are so sublimely tied to the gameplay that, again, you cannot separate them, but this time in a good way, And so one of the things I've been so excited to talk about, because I actually remember, because this was one that we were actually able to play in the same room together, which was kind of neat.
It's true. We passed the controller back and forth and everything.
It was a blast and a half. But so I remember though, like we were playing, and like I paused it for a second, and I was like, okay, wait. There is a background and a foreground. How come you can just so easily tell what you can and cannot interact with, right? And I actually had to sit there and like think about it for a while, because we've played games where it's not super obvious at all,
Like Home Alone 2, Lost in New York.
Oh God. Anyway, so then, after some reflection, I realized that everything that's in the foreground either A, moves, right? Nothing in the background moves, or B, it actually has, so everything in the background is either one or two colors, right? Two on the absolute most. And those are like the hills where everything's a one flat color. And then there's like two dots of black to say like, hey, this is a tree, like it's a hill, right? Everything in the foreground has generally at least two, but most of the time 3 colors to it. And the colors are interspersed in a much more detailed fashion. So your eyes naturally go to it. And there is just no question in your mind what is in the foreground is what is in the background. Because there's just, even with this level of graphics, there's much more detail put into the things that are in the foreground that you can, in fact, interact with.
And I think there's also, and I can't be 100% sure about this, but I think at most times, and certainly whenever possible, the background color choices are different colors than whatever's in the foreground, because like the ground is not green like the hills are green. The ground is usually bricks or stone, like when you're underground. And when you're underground or underwater, there is no background. Like
Right.
it's a much flatter seeming environment because of that. But when you're in like a normal above ground level, if there are things in the foreground, they're never that sky blue color. If there are
Right.
things in the foreground, I think the bushes that are like up close to you are the pipe green, whereas the hills that are in the background, I think, are a darker green. And then there's the levels with like the black sky, which the only thing in the foreground that's black are bullet bills and the
Right.
little Beetle Bailey guys,
Which all move.
which all move. So it's like super obvious that you can interact with them. So there's like two or three. There's the level of detail, there's the color choice, and then movement, so that you never are confused. Like, is this a thing that if I collide with it, I'm either it's going to arrest my momentum, or I can stand on it, or it'll kill me, because it's super obvious that it's there with you. It is on your plane of existence, and everything else is, way, way, way off in the distance.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that and now you mentioned it, I think that all of the only, like you said, all of the black backgrounds are a single color and flat, except for the overworld, in which case the bricks are always like, brown, a little bit more detailed, like everything, which is interesting now that I'm thinking about it, because like even when the overworld turns white, right, in world 5 dash whatever, right, like where it's theoretically like a snow world, I guess, or whatever that was supposed to represent.
Yeah, I actually have no idea what that's implying.
Me either. But they changed the background to black.
Yes, they did.
Because the foreground was a little bit flatter, because they didn't, I guess, and it may just be that they just did not have as many whites to work with.
I think there are shades of gray, but the shades of gray, by
Are shades of
definition,
gray.
they can't pop the way contrasting colors would pop, because the brownish red bricks against a blue sky is going to pop way more than gray does against anything.
Right, because it's gray.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you had 50 shades of it, it just isn't going to
Nope,
pop
nope,
out.
nope. So another thing, just while we're talking about colors specifically, is there was something that was bugging me, and I didn't think to articulate this while we were playing together, but I was like transcribing my notes from my chicken scratch onto our Google Doc, and I was like, there's just something about the color that's been bothering me. Oh, wait. The original Super Mario Brothers is like the only Mario Brothers game that is pre-Crayola crayon colors, because when they brought Super Mario Brothers 2 to the US and it was actually Doki Doki Panic was like super bright colors. And then Super Mario 3 is a stage play, so it's super bright colors. And then Super Mario World is like supercharged super bright colors. Like it's really turned up to 11, and it's been that way ever since. And I know they could have chosen brighter colors when they made the original Super Mario Brothers, so I don't think it was necessarily a limitation. I think they either hadn't decided to make everything candy coated, or they, by the standards of the time, maybe those colors were candy coated, and then later they had to ratchet it up. But I was like, everything is so pretty and everything is really clear, and I'm really able to determine what it is I'm supposed to be doing and what I have to worry about and what I can ignore. But there was just something about the colors that was bothering me, and I was like, oh, because compared to Super Mario World or even Super Mario 3, they're muted. Like they're really, really muted, but only compared to those games. Within just the frame of Super Mario World, it's very bright and colorful. Or Super Mario Brothers, it's very bright and colorful.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because all the colors are definitely a little bit more muted, but like you said, they may just have not picked an aesthetic. But again, the colors do absolutely serve gameplay. I mean, even little things like with contrast, where and again, I'm not 100% sure that they did this intentionally, but I'm gonna say they did it intentionally, right? is so most of the time, like you have like the Hammer Brothers, right, or things like that, right? When they're throwing their hammers, most of the time it's against a blue background, right?
Mm.
So those hammers are pretty clear and easy to see. And then like when they're not, when they're up against like a black background, they turn like gray. So they are actually a little bit harder to see. That doesn't happen until way later,
Right. And
So-
I think in World 8, you also see them in front of like the brick background, like the castle bricks, not the ground bricks, which is like the middle step, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
here they're a little bit harder to see, and then later they're going to be almost impossible to see.
Right, but by then you're familiar with the arc and all that sort of stuff. So it's and again it's teaching. It's teaching you through the visuals. It's teaching you. That's all this game does is teach. And so when you die, it's your fault. I also just loved the we've spoken about this in a number of different games where like there's good palette swapping and bad palette swapping. And so this game is a mechanics driven game. I mean, like the story is, like rescue princess, defeat Bowser. Like if the entirety of the plot can be summed up in one sentence, it's not a story driven game, know? So like when so basically when they're coming up with visuals and all sorts of stuff, and it's common knowledge that this game like really pushed the wrapper for what they could actually put in the game to where they were like cutting bizarre corners that you don't even notice. But if they're cutting those corners, they weren't doing it for funsies. They were doing it because this game was as full as it could possibly be. So when they do these palette swaps, they did it in a way where the world really does feel different. But again, it is just a palette swap. Like the one where you go, like I said, I think it's World 5, where like everything's gray and against a black background, you're like, oh my gosh, it's weird and new and different. Even though it's like, no, it's all the same assets. They just changed the color of them. But then they also, because of where they put it and the fact that it is mechanically very much more difficult, it really does sell that the world is like, this is a colder, darker, worse world,
I mean, even just I don't know, level World 6, maybe, like where it's basically all the same foreground assets, but a black background.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically the only difference. But there's no green hills, so you feel you're in this more like harsh, stone, gritty environment where it's just like red bricks in all directions. But that's all you've been staring at. Like it's the same friggin' thing you've been seeing, the entire game. It's just that because it's in contrast to the blue background, you're like, oh man, things have gotten very, very real. It's like if we just took level 1 and gave it a black background, you'd be feeling the same way. But that's what's impressive about it. That's what's clever, is they trained you on friendly blue skies.
Yep.
And then they're like, ooh, scary black skies. And you're like, scary black skies. And it's I mean, yeah, the levels are harder, but a part of the reason they feel different is just that. I mean, it's like one of my favorite things I love to throw in the face of wine snobs. Don't at me, wine snobs. Is they've done a couple studies where they just like put red food coloring into white wine, and all of a sudden it tastes totally different. And it's like, no, you actually just had 2 glasses of the exact same white wine. And but there's, if you're doing that on purpose, like not to just piss off somebody who's a wine snob, but like using that psychological trick to effect, like it's done here, that's tremendous. Like how awesome is that as a developer when you're like, okay, we want this world to feel ominous. Well, instead of tiling the color blue in the background, we're going to tile the color black, and ominous happens.
Incentivize that employee. Yeah. No, absolutely. And again, like you said, the fact that they did it later on, like if they started with the super ominous one, if they flipped them, it would have been like, why are things getting less real?
You're actually running from, like, Bowser has won and you are fleeing the Mushroom Kingdom. So the further you get, yeah, it's Braid. The further you get, like the nicer the sky is, everything's fine.
Well, and so with all of that, and also to touch on that though, just imagine, and listeners, close your eyes, especially if you're driving. But no, just imagine how much more flat and uninteresting the game would see if they didn't do that.
Oh, definitely.
If World 5 wasn't, gray and black, it was, the same color as everything else. If World 8 wasn't the normal foreground against a black background, it would be like, okay, so, because then it would feel less like a world and more like a game, because it feels like you're moving, and as you're getting closer and closer to this big bad thing, the world is changing and turning on you a little bit, whereas if it was all the same stuff, you'd be like, oh, well, now I'm on, World 8, I'm almost up the tower, and then you just that would have been it, Well,
and from a teaching aesthetic as well, if you want your players to kind of remember, like, oh, because I think in the let's just say it's World 6, the one that's all gray, like there's a lot more platforming. Like that's one of the worlds that's like almost all those like T-shaped platforms.
Mhm.
And so telegraphing that through color means the second you see the very first screen, your brain is already kind of like getting your thumbs ready for those platforming jumps, right? And just like when you see the underwater levels or you see the underground levels, the colors and the slightly different positioning of certain platforming elements immediately tell you, oh, you're in world 3 or 6 or 8 or whatever. So get that part of your muscle memory fresh and ready to go because this is what's happening. It would probably be a dramatically harder game if all of the platforms and all the obstacles were exactly laid out as they are now, but it was all the same tiles as World 1-1, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, I mean it would be substantially harder. One of the other things that I thought was very interesting, because normally during visuals is when we speak about the hitbox, is
I'm so glad we're going to this.
I actually thought that the hitbox, and this may just be, because one of the things that I struggle with sometimes is that if a game is like a 6 or better, I tend to be a little bit more, so acknowledge my biases, I tend to be a little bit more forgiving with it, than like if a game's like a 3, and most of it's just kind of, I mean, the same thing with like, even people, where it's just kind of like if somebody is just a train wreck all the way down and you see another instance of them being a train wreck, you're like, well, this is just them being a train wreck because they're a train wreck, not this person is an upstanding person. And then there's this one minor thing. You're like, well, maybe they're actually doing that for a reason, that I'm just not familiar with.
Okay, yeah. So you're talking about, there's a difference between noticing a blemish, which I think is like a white wall with a single pockmark on it. You're a lot more likely to notice that because it's otherwise unblemished. Whereas a Jackson Pollock, you don't notice every individual paint splotch because you're not supposed to. But I think what you're alluding to is almost, you see the white wall with the single pockmark, and because the entire wall is so pristine, you're like, wait, is that supposed to be there? Maybe that's basically supposed to be there.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's exactly that, where I'm just kind of like, I mean, because again, especially if it was like that wall was painted by, like
let's say Michelangelo. He painted some buildings.
Yeah, like if Michelangelo painted a painting and there was like a single blue dot out of place, I'd be like, maybe I'm wrong, So, anyways, all that being said, the hitbox felt very reasonable, fair, appropriate. There were, and we can both speak to it, a number of times where both of us were playing where we were like, that was generous,
Incredibly generous.
Yeah, where we were both like, ooh, really? Like, you're giving that to me? I totally thought I would have died. But there was never a time when I got laid out where I was like, that was garbage, And so I think that, because we both played this game a number of times, and there's so much of it, that as we were playing it, where we were like, ooh, no, I definitely duffed that, where we hit that razor thin edge. It was like the coyote physics of the game, where like you hit that, where you notice that you hit that razor thin edge, and then it kind of like breaks the illusion a little bit, where you're like, the game's being a little bit more generous than it should be, but I'm okay with it.
See, and that is exactly the part that I got hung up on, is when your Mario sprite passes through, like your head like passes through an enemy sprite, or your feet or whatever, like just as you're jumping, and the game's like, nah, we're gonna give it to you, you're fine. That I prefer. I mean, don't get me wrong, I hands down prefer, if you're going to let the sprites collide and not count it as a hit, I'm like, okay, like, thank you for letting me focus on enjoying it as opposed to punishing me for 2 pixels overlapping. That being said, I wish there was a way to not even let me know that happened, because it does, as you said, break the immersion just a little bit when it's like, yeah, that squid thing definitely passed right through my face. So unless it's some kind of like ethereal squid, I don't know why it passed right through my face. And now you're thinking about the game as opposed to playing, like just like living it, right? You're examining it as a piece of art as opposed to experiencing it. And I know that's very like pish posh, but that is like, I did notice it, right? Like every single, I mean, it's our friggin' job to critique these things. So
Right.
when something actually makes me like critique my critique, where I'm like aware that I'm aware of it, I'm like, oh no, I'm too many levels outside of experiencing the game now. So, and that was something I found happened a lot, to the point where I agree with you. I do not think it was a mistake. I think Michelangelo put that blue dot there so that people would stare at it and wonder why that blue dot is there.
Right, and that's the thing, is that because honestly, I could come up with a number of different theories as to why this was. Best guess though is that they knew at the time that they were mostly marketing to a younger audience, you know. So they were like, if we make this, and it was the first step to something that we see game developers use all the time now, which is if we make this fair, perfectly fair, it will not feel fair.
Yes,
you know,
correct.
And so that's the thing, is I think that they kind of erred on, okay, well, we're not, because I think because probably what they did was they made the hitbox exactly Mario, you know, like if you touch a bad guy, you're done. Right. And then everybody said like, this is insanely hard, you know, and they were like, all right, well, let's reel it back up. Like, even if they just reeled it back a pixel, you know, there would still be those edge cases where you definitely feel you should have died. But in a sense, I almost feel that speaks to how fair the game feels, not how fair the game is, because the game, like every single time when you expect the game to be perfectly fair. That's how good they had built it out to feel that way, right? So
Agreed.
that way, once in a while, when you do hit that thing where you just get to peek behind the curtain a little bit, and you're like, that wasn't fair, but it was in my favor, so I'm gonna let it go. You know?
Yeah, and if the player is going to become aware that fairness has been violated, I think it should almost always be in their favor, because I can't think of a good justification off the top of my head for why you'd go the other direction. And this is a reason. It's not a good reason, but if you're making one of those like hardest game ever games where there's a bunch of things that you couldn't possibly have planned around or predicted or even reacted to, you just have to eventually memorize that that's what's going to happen. I guess then maybe like your hitbox randomly changes size and you just have to be aware of it would be something you might incorporate into your game. But in basically any other circumstance outside of that insanely specific case, yeah, if you're going to let two sprites collide and not have it kill me, okay. But if you're going to have me be noticeably not in contact with another sprite and have it kill me, probably never okay.
Well, and what it's going to be is it's not going to be that. It's going to be your pixel did actually touch that pixel for a amount of time that you would be unable to realize.
Sure.
And then it would kill you, and that would not feel fair. And I can actually think of one that I wouldn't. I kind of want to play this game, like I'm thinking of right now, that I'm making up in my head. If you did one based in the Cthulhu mythos, where you did crap like that to the player, that I think would be the appropriate use of it. You know, where like you occasionally err not in the player's favor, so that way it actually makes them think like you're super fair, right? And then all of a sudden you're a little unfair against the player. That would make them question their like that would make them very frustrated and emotionally uneven, which I think would put them in the appropriate place for like a Cthulhu mythos game.
Yeah, I mean, you could do lots of interesting things where it's like, oh, I mean, just take Mario. Like, we're gonna make Mario super unfun, and every level, it does a random number generator, 1 through 10. And 5 is the normal Mario hitbox. Less than 5 is a smaller hitbox where you're harder to kill, and more than 5 is, a larger hitbox where things kill you even when they haven't actually crossed into your sprite, your visible sprite. Like, yeah, that kind of thing would be insane, because you would learn to be terrified all the time because you would never know which hitbox you had.
Right, and that's the thing,
and this is not that.
No. Mario is not Cthulhu, nor should it be. But yeah, so I mean, that's the thing, is you always want the game to feel fair, and I think if I remember correctly, there was definitely one time when we were playing where I was like, and there's the coyote physics, or. Where like I was just run, jump, and I was like, oh no, I did not jump soon enough for that. But again, if not for the fact that we were both keeping like an eye out to critique this, I would have just been like, oh man, that was close. Whereas, I was like, no, I did not make that,
No, I agree completely. And this is, I think we've patted Nintendo pretty hard on the back generally for like their first party stuff. And I mean, this is one of many examples of just how thoughtful they are. Like, hey, sometimes the hitbox is going to go in favor of the player. Oh, you mean so sometimes the hitbox will be wrong? That's not what I said. Sometimes it's going to go in favor of the player. It will never be wrong in the other direction.
Right. So yeah, honestly, aside from and we'll put links in the show notes for this, but but no, I mean, if you guys like this podcast, just go out and Google any number of different things on, because many other people with much better eyes than I than we have done all of the different like awesome little things they did to save space on the visuals. Like the clouds and the bushes are the same thing, like the fact that the Goombas and the mushrooms are basically palette swaps, so I mean, if you're interested in that, just like I said, like, because I don't know what else you have for visuals, but if we went into that, if we went down that rabbit hole, we'd be doing this for 3 hours. So
oh yeah, no, I mean,
there's tons of stuff like that.
I can essentially promise you that at major universities all around the world in art and computer science and game design, they are studying Super Mario Brothers, not because it is the pinnacle of these techniques, but because it's a very consumable example. Like someone who does not care about video games or who does not care about art or who does not care about computer science can still watch a YouTube video about like, here's all the clever things they did to make Super Mario fit on a Nintendo cartridge. And you'd be like, damn, that was cool. Like it's because it was a level of programming sophistication that's more digestible. Like if you watch the same kind of thing for like, here's how they made the skin looks so realistic in Call of Duty 97, it'd be like, magic, I guess.
Yep. Well, it's actually, and this is slightly tangential, but why I've heard a number of good people say if you want to get into game design, like video game design, start with board games, because there's nothing going on under the hood. All of the mechanics, everything is there for you to see, so you can very easily see how the mechanics play off of each other, how they incentivize player behavior, and all that sort of stuff. And so that's, I think, why Mario stands out so well in that sense, is because unlike in, Borderlands, where there's just so many things that the physics engine alone can be doing under the hood that is so hard to pick out. It's like, no, it's really straightforward. It's really easy, like you said, really easy, really digestible.
Yeah. I mean, to the point where originally they just literally called him Jumpman because that's what he did. But we need to talk about the audio, and I assume most people are like, oh, well, the original Super Mario Brothers audio, like, obviously, that's one of the greatest soundtracks ever made. And I agree, but I'm going to go right to my complaint. Nintendo, and I mean, I understand why they did this, so I'm not knocking them, but in hindsight, it feels weird, or in hind sound. Hind listening. I don't know how this one works. In past listening, it's if you pause the podcast right now and you hum the Super Mario Brothers like World 1-1 sound, overture, like do 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 do.
I just want you to know there's a strong part of me that just wanted to drop like a bunch of F-bombs in a row to make you censor me with the Mario music, but I held off. Yeah, I don't really know why.
I appreciate your commitment to the PG rating that iTunes enforces on us. But yeah, if you imagine that song in your head, I guarantee you the vast majority of the time you have heard that song in this game, that is not what you were hearing, because Nintendo historically, like over their entire lifespan, has never been known for pushing the limits of graphics technology. They have always had beautiful looking games, but it was never cutting edge, except maybe in the like Nintendo era. But then, I mean, the Super Nintendo had powerful hardware, but it wasn't the most powerful hardware that was available. And then from there, they just fell off a cliff. The N64 was nowhere near the most powerful. The GameCube was nowhere near the most powerful. The Wii was nowhere near the most powerful stuff that was available on the market. I'm not even because people love to argue like, well, the PS2, blah 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 blah, and I'm like, shut up, I don't care. It had Metal Gear Solid, but but what really matters to me is that Nintendo has always pushed the boundaries of music, and I think you can see that going back to the original Super Mario Brothers, because the music is absolutely amazing, and anytime anything generates a noise in the game, it impacts the instruments that are playing the background music, because they are literally using 100% of the Nintendo's sound card power to drive this very, very rich score. And every sound effect then pulls a random instrument out of the score. So like if it's a high pitched sound effect like a coin, you'll lose like maybe the melody out of the overture. If it's something like a brick breaking, or like there aren't a lot of low noises. Maybe like the thunk of like hitting a coin box that's done. You'll lose like the bass line out of the overture, and it's really, really freaking disorienting once you notice it. Like it was totally a glass shattering moment for me when I was just like, why does this song sound so bad? Oh, because they literally can't help it. And I think they did the right thing. It's weird when you like stop to really, really focus on it. Like you close your eyes and listen. Like I had my eyes closed and I was listening to you play the game, and I was like, this sounds horrible. Like it sounds like that YouTube video of the guy playing the Jurassic Park theme on the pianica. Like it just sounds so freaking awkward. But I don't think you are likely to notice that, and you are almost definitely likely to not care about it if you are the one playing.
Yes, I agree with that, because I didn't notice it. But no, I think that I agree with that because, excuse me, when you hit those things, when you interact with the environment in that fashion, right, you are actually focused on the sound effect happening, right?
Totally.
So when you're collecting coins, you're just like, your brain says like, I'm collecting coins. And so it doesn't even like pay attention to the fact that some of the music's dropped out, because your brain is actually honing in on the mechanics based sound effect, right? So I think that's, I mean, one could make the argument, and I think that honestly what happened was they were like, look, we've got, this much processing power, this much audio, to deal with, and we want it all, and so this is the best way we can go about doing that. So and you had some other notes about like the song length that they did, which we can get to in a second, but yeah, but I really think that, to have the music become less engaging when things are happening that require your engagement was the way to go, Yeah,
and because the alternative, I suppose, would have been, well, if we can only play so many sounds at the same time, we'll just make all the songs worse so that the full song is always playing even when there's sound effects happening. And that would be a tragedy. Like this is some of the most influential, I'm not even going to say best, but it is no question some of the most influential video game music ever written. So to say like, what would the world be like if they had skimped on it? It's like, I don't know. What would the world be like if the sky wasn't blue? Like
just smash cuts to like this like shelled out post-apocalypse. It's like if only Mario had the appropriate sound. And actually, I would liken it to, somebody saying like, here's the thing, man. Every night when you go home and eat, right, you are going to have a 5-course dinner, except for when they feed you at work. Then you got to go home and eat whatever you packed for lunch, right? But when that doesn't happen, beautiful dinner, or you just get kind of mediocre dinner all the time. It's like, well, I'd much rather have the amazing music playing whenever there's not something else that needs to be pulling my attention than having mediocre music playing throughout,
And this is why I say that most players are not likely to even notice that this is happening because of exactly what you said. Like when there's a sound effect that's interfering with the music, the thing I care about is the sound effect. When I am just sitting there looking over my shoulder to see if I'm going to miss the school bus or not, like then nothing's happening. So I'm hearing the full orchestra, like I'm hearing the full soundtrack because I'm not interacting with, Goombas or pipes or picking up coins or whatever. So it seems I mean, in a lot of ways, it is the same corner cutting that they did in graphics places, but they were cutting corners because they were like, this is the experience we want to deliver, and we are going to do it, even though the hardware super does not want us to do it. Like, we are going to make it happen, and it's really hard to fault somebody for that. Like, yeah, would it have been better if the sound effects could have just played over the music and the music just like ducked a little bit so you could hear the sound effects clearly? Sure. And is that what they did later? Yes, it is. But at the time, they couldn't do that. So like, I can't honestly say like, oh, I would want crappier music. But I will say once you hear it, it is very, very hard to unhear.
That's like bad kerning. Like once you see it, once somebody teaches you to point out, you hate that person a little bit for pointing it out to you.
Yeah, dude, the ultimate example of bad kerning. And if you Google this, you can actually find it. And this is not a fake thing. This place was around the corner from where I grew up. There was a video rental chain that had like, I don't know, 5 or 6 locations, and it was called Megaflix. And all the letters were very like 80s rounded, like laser letters, like pew pew letters, Megaflix. Well, when you put a rounded L and a sans serif I right next to each other with no space in between them, it really looks like a U.
Nice.
Yeah. So there was just like driving around my hometown, there were just these giant green neon signs.
Yep. And I'm sure, as you got older, you just drove by and went,
oh, yeah. No, I mean, the second you know what that word means, you cannot help but be like, those signs probably caused car accidents because people were laughing at them. But it's one of those things that your brain latches onto that. And once you see it, it never says Megaflix again. Not for all of time will that ever say Megaflix again.
Well, and now I kind of like that as a litmus test for parents. Like now I'm picturing like, you and your dad driving by that every day on your way into school or the way back from school or whatever. And then, like one day, like you look over and you go, he goes, who taught you that word?
Exactly right. Like no questions of clarity to make sure he knows what I'm laughing at. Like it was Jim, wasn't it? Jim said it. I knew it was him. I never liked that kid.
Damn it, Jim.
So the one other thing I will say about sound this is like a gripe, but it bothers me a little bit that when you get hurt is the same noise as the pipe.
Yeah, and we discussed that, and because then that caused me to say like, well, how many sound effects are there total in this game? And so then we went through it, and I think we managed to come up with about 7.
It's like around a dozen.
Yeah, because I think there's pause, jump, coin, brick, bullet bill, there's just not a
Goomba,
whole lot
flames.
Yeah.
Whoop.
But that yep. But all that being said, I agree with you that having anything that makes the same sound of you getting hit is not ideal. That being said, the visuals between those two things could not be more different. Mm-hmm. So I think that they probably relied on that a little bit. I mean, honestly, it could have just been a thing where they were like, we really need a sound for them going down these tubes. I don't know, dude. We're already maxed out on sound. Like the sound guy's already sweating bullets from everything he's had to do and kludge to like get this amazing like soundtrack in there, So it's like, just I don't know, just the same one as when you get hit. And
oh man, we need one more sound. No, there's no room. No, come on, just one more sound. No, I'm serious. There is literally no more room. You're going to have to reuse a sound or have no sound for this. Which sound do we use the least? The pipe sound.
Well, and actually, I had one other thought about this where I was like, this, and I don't even know if this was something I thought about, but it was something where I was like, you could make this argument where they are the same sound. However, the pipe sound is one that you make happen, and the hit sound is one that happens to you.
That's true. And if you really want to start to stretch the philosophy of the pipe sound, I think you could say
that needs to be our book. The philosophy of the pipe sound.
That'll be like one of the spin-off or sequels to our like Dr. Mario project management book.
Yep.
But when you go down the pipe, Mario visibly like goes down on the screen. When you get hit, Mario visibly goes down on the screen because he shrinks. Like you go from being tall Mario to being short Mario. So that's a pretty tenuous connection. I'm not going to lie, but like you could make an argument that is a connection. Like that is a reason it's better than any other random noise in the game.
That is true. And unless you have anything else for sound, I'll say that the fact that the game is so good that like these are like the downsides. Like, oh, one of the downsides is that these two sound effects are the same. Like I would have prayed to any god that would have listened from some of the games that we've played to have that problem. Like
no, agreed. And this is the thing is like I'm not looking for things to complain about, but I'm trying to be fair that if something stood out to me as like it irked me or just like rubbed me the wrong way, I'm like, well, I sure would have crapped all over Home Alone 2 Lost in New York for 90 minutes. So I should I should probably be honest about Super Mario Brothers. But I will say my last kind of thing with sound, and we've said this with a few other Nintendo games, is like, by which I mean like first party Nintendo games, not necessarily the Nintendo. It's just the sounds, like they're crisp, man. Like they're the classic. Like when you think of what it sounds like to pick up a coin, there's a really good chance you are imagining the original Super Mario Brothers sound, because it's changed a lot in the intervening 30 years, but less than you might think. Like the way Super Mario Brothers looks has changed orders of magnitude, but that coin sound somehow is almost the same as it ever was. It's just like, it's like crisp and nice, and like the fire sound when you're in like world 4 or level 4 of a world and Bowser's like shooting fire at you, like it's that like rumbly, like kind of crackling fire noise. Like the sound effects are just like they're good, like they feel good. Even the like the mushroom and it, like the, I'm not even gonna try and impersonate it,
the growing noise.
Yeah, the blah 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 blah.
It's
that
beautiful.
It was perfect. But that's it's good. Like it's just really good. And that's another sound effect that I think anytime they make a new Mario game, they probably have like almost like a style guide. Like if you're going to make a new version of that sound, like for this new hardware, it still needs to invoke this exact same feeling. It probably has to be certain notes. It probably has to, play in like a certain frequency range. Like it's just, oh man, it's good. Like it's good.
Yeah. No, and I agree. I think that honestly, like if I picked up a penny off the ground and went ding like that, and somebody said like, "Why'd you make that sound?" It's like, because that's the sound that it makes. Like, it's not like, oh, because it sounds good. Oh, because it reminds me of Super Mario. It's like, no, that is the sound that coins make when you pick them up. Like it is 65 degrees outside, and that is the sound that coins make when you pick them up. Like it is just a fact. No,
I'm with you. And that's kind of my feelings on the sounds in general. It's just like, and the music, it's I know you have your horrible chocolate ideas, and I'm infinitely sorry, but no one short of someone who was born deaf could not enjoy this score and these sound effects. Like they're just, I've said it before, they're charming. They're charming.
Yeah. And more importantly, is they certainly hold up. Like even with like an 8-bit system.
Whoa, man! Don't. People have been on the edge of their seats.
I know, right?
Don't give it away.
I didn't say it all held up. I said just the sound did.
Okay, that's fair.
I mean, clearly from our discussion of the visuals just terrible.
Yeah,
awful.
No, yeah. There's a lot of it was very two-sided story back there in visuals. But let's talk about controls and mechanics.
So literally the first note I have for controls and mechanics is everything you need is in level 1-1.
Oh,
everything you need to.
I'll do you one better. Everything you need is in the, I set the controller down to take a sip of my Coca-Cola and it started playing, but you go and we'll see if we both have the full set of rules.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I didn't enumerate all of the rules or anything. And I do agree that it's all there in the, I set my controller down. The reason why I think it's important, the reason why I think it's important that it's all there for you, the player, is because one, you can't rely on the player to walk away and have it all there, like,
oh, you mean watch the little thing?
Yeah, you can't rely on somebody to watch the cinematic. And two, it's a lot easier to make a scripted cinematic where everything happens that you need to have happen versus creating mechanical boundaries in which everything that you need to have happen happens, you know?
Agreed. And to be fair, the designers obviously also agree with you, because the scripted cinematic is just like the first 200 feet of World 1-1. So it's not like they show you this dainty practice space in which to learn the game mechanics that you, the player, never get to live in. That is exactly what the first thing you do is this perfect dainty practice space.
Yes, absolutely. And again, if we talked about all of the little nuances that they do to not only make sure that you get all this information, but to force you without feeling like they're forcing you to get all this information, this would be 50 years long, right? That being said, I would like to recommend if you go, and we've mentioned them before, the guys who do Extra Credits are awesome, amazing, and very, very good at what they do. And they actually did a video on Design Club on like the first minute of this game, and it was just world shattering, the amount of like thought and effort they put into it. But just to gloss over it in a neophyte way, they show you the power up system. They show you, like what you can and can't interact with. They show you going down pipes. They show you jumping. More importantly, they show you the fact that when you jump and hold the jump button, you jump higher than if you just tap the jump button, which is not necessarily an intuitive mechanic, because they put things in your way where you have to learn that. It's a gating mechanic, right? And also they show you that if you run first and then press and hold the jump button, you jump even higher. All of that, everything you need to know to clear every other level is in World 1-1, which is the tutorial stage, And then the other awesome thing that they do is that if you've played the tutorial stage, you don't need the tutorial stage. Like a third of the way through it, there's a pipe that gets you past it lets you cheat past it. It just gives you a bunch of coins and then puts you at the end of the tutorial stage, which you don't feel like you're hitting skip tutorial, right? You can't do it like in many modern games. You could just hit skip tutorial, and the people who skip the tutorial are the people that normally need it the most, right? Yep. You have to have played the tutorial enough times to have dinked around with it to find this secret, right? So they know you've played the tutorial and well enough to get the secret. It's like the thing of, if you know enough about the game to question it, then you know enough to do it right, kind of a thing, right? It's that, it's brilliant. And so, yeah, the fact that they've managed to cram everything that you need to know in the first minute or so of gameplay, so that way they can then further increase, your skill and ability as you continue to play. It's mind blowing and fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, Nintendo gets unbelievable praise heaped on them for how good they are at teaching through gameplay. And it's really hard to question that any of it is undeserved. Like, Apple is the quintessential, like, fanboy example. Like, if you want to name a company that gets unlimited praise, even though there are times they have hardcore screwed up, Apple's a great example of that. They deserve the vast majority of the praise they get, but when they screw up, somehow nobody ever seems to remember it, and they still go on to make more money than anyone else has ever made, and it's kind of weird. But with Nintendo, to say like, they're just the absolute best at teaching through gameplay and designing these kinds of very informative experiences that don't feel like they're talking down to you. They don't feel boring. They don't feel like something you're just desperately trying to skip. Like, yes, they really do that. And there are dozens and dozens of successful examples. And there are probably some failures, but the thing is, I can't think of one. I can't think of a first-party Nintendo game from like one of their core franchises. And the reason I'm limiting it by core franchises because like that's where you put your best talent, right? So like these are their best designers and their best developers and their best engineers and everything. So I can't think of a game from like the Super Mario Brothers series, or even as much as I hate Zelda 2, like it still does the things that Nintendo is good at. It sucks in some other areas super hardcore, but like teaching through gameplay and like more or less communicating to you what you need to do to function in the game world, it does that. Now, navigating the story of Zelda 2 is a completely different thing, but like, how do I jump? How do I stab? Like, all of those things are communicated pretty much just as well as they are in Metroid, as they are in, Super Mario Brothers. All the stabbing you do in Super Mario Brothers. So
Yes.
so it's
At least all stabbing I do.
so much. But that the little opening, let's call it a cinematic. But the thing I like about that is there are like two mechanics that I think are not two significant mechanics that are not shown there. You don't see him go down the pipe, and you don't see him. What does he not do? He breaks a brick. He gets a mushroom. He kills an enemy. He gets hurt by an enemy, which makes him small again. So that teaches you like you can take more hits, and then he dies when he's small. So it's like, but when you're small, you die. I guess you don't see like the fire flower or the star or swimming, but like by the time you get to those things, you know what to do. You know what to try.
Well, because they built up a good base, because because then like they're like I said, like we said, like in the first minute or so, they teach you all that you need to know about like the physics of the world that you're in, and now they're going to teach you nuanced things like how to drive a car, like how to apply for a job, like these other mechanics they can put on, because it's not they're doing a good job with the amount of like mental space that you the player have to put at this task, so they're saying like, okay, the first minute or so they're going to be taking in everything, so we need to make it very, very easy for them to learn this stuff. So then now that you've got how the world works, they dump you in water and they say like, okay, and then for the first little bit of a water world, like it's just basically you swimming. There's no enemies, there's a couple of coins to
there's ground as opposed to a bottomless death pit.
Right. So it just gives you time to, kind of play around in a safe space. And then like, okay, now we're going to throw an enemy at you. Now we're going to throw a pit at you. Now we're going to give you actually some mechanical difficulties. But the first ones are just to give you enough of a prod to actually experiment with the mechanics.
Right. And that's why I think that opening cinematic feels really ridiculous to call that a cinematic. But that's why I think that even that was incredibly thoughtful, because they show you all of the mechanics you need essentially to make it through the tutorial stage. And if you can make it to the end of World 1-1, you now know enough about how the world of Super Mario Brothers works to figure out how it is to swim and what the superstar does and how the fire flower works. Even though they didn't show you those things, and even though you may not have even gotten them in the tutorial stage, you now have all of the tools to dissect new things when they arrive. Because they could have absolutely shoved all that crap into World 1-1, or they could have had an opening cinematic tutorial thingy that's a fake level that you never get to play in, where he gets a superstar and he does this and he goes underwater and he goes.
You see, when you get a superstar, this is what happens, like all delivered through text. And yep.
Yeah, and they didn't do that, and more importantly, they didn't do that because they knew they wouldn't have to.
Right. And also, so at the like you said, at the end of World 1-1, the player has all the tools that they need in order to continue to combat the game, to play the game, right? And most importantly is the developer knows you have all of those tools. And that is equally important, is because the developer now says, like, I know that these things. And speaking of like little tweaks that they do that I'd never really noticed until I was playing through, now focused on playing it and critiquing it, was there are a couple of things that they actually do that I think are developer cheats, like in the sense that they are ways for the developer to more heavily rely on what you will mechanically have at your disposal, not skill wise, right? So like, for example, Mario, when he's small, you get the mushroom and it makes you big, and you get the fire flower and it gives you fire powers, right? If you get hit, it always takes you back down to small Mario.
Yes, which I'm not surprised that they went on to change that in later Mario games, where you're small, big, powered up, and then you go back through that chain. If you get hit, you lose your power up. If you get hit again, then you're small.
Right, but that's the thing, is that like, especially in this earlier stage of development, the developer need to be able to say like, I know at most, like they will be able to take 1 or 2 hits. That's it, not up to 4. You know, so when they walk into an area, you're like, worst case scenario, they will take a hit and they die. Best case scenario, they will take a hit, continue on invincible for a couple seconds, and then if they take another hit, they die. But that's something, that kind of discrete amount of information is much easier to program around than like saying, oh, well, they've got like, they could have anywhere between 10 and 89 hit points. And, like, I don't know how much damage to make these things do, or to think about a much, much worse game, right? It's like, oh, well, they've got, 10 hit points, but they've got 30 mana and a spell that lets them turn mana into health, maybe. So do they have that spell? How much mana do they have? Did they upgrade their mana? Did they upgrade their health? When you upgrade those two things, do they upgrade at a 1-to-1 ratio? Because if they don't, then it matters, So all of that's a nightmare to program around. And because nobody's psychic, chances are they don't program around it well, and it comes off clunky and weird. Whereas this one, it's like, no. You can always, at the most, take 2 hits. And later on, they put in some power-ups that you can only get when you're small Mario. So that means that they're saying, like if you are, I will be confident as a developer with the tools I've given you that you will be big Mario. You will be able to take 2 hits at this point, because you either could take 2 hits and then couldn't get this power-up, or you couldn't take 2 hits, but then you could get to the power-up, so therefore you got it, and now you can take 2 hits,
Yeah, and I think through that lens, you are absolutely right that this was not a mistake, and this was a specific choice, because there was an area, I don't remember what world it was in, but it doesn't really matter, but there was an area where there was a question mark block that had a fire flower in it, and there was an enemy right underneath it. And I was like, ooh, wait. Let him hit you so that you're small, then get the fire flower, because it's already on screen. It's already a fire flower. It can't just turn into a mushroom now, but when you touch it, it acts like a mushroom.
Yeah, it does. And I remember, we were we were playing, and I said, I think I said, like, oh, when you get a fire flower and you're small, what happens? And Sue was in the room too, and I think, like, Sue said, like, oh, it turns you into Fire Mario. I'm like, yeah, I think that too. Does it though? And like all three of us
we
were
like, all on the side of fire, go straight to fire.
Yeah, go straight to fire. And like all 3 of us were like, well, it's so rare that would happen too, because of exactly what you said. It's like you have to hit the block, then get small, then pick up the thing. But I was like, well, let's stress test this. And then we were all floored. We're like, really? But again, it's just kind of like the developers like, okay, no, you always go up by 1 level, because again, they need to rely on that. And so then the thing is, you want to develop for the player, not the developer. But that being said, you can't completely ignore the developer, because then they can't make a good puzzle, Like if I say, hey, man, I need you to make a puzzle that is maximized for the player. And you're like, I got it, man. What are some of the constraints I'm working on? Or, no constraints, because we want to maximize for everybody. So anyone between the age of 1 and 90 can play this game with any level of education that speaks any language. Go. And it's like,
straight hallway.
Straight hallway. Walk from point A to point B. But yeah, so I mean, that's the thing. So you eventually have to give the developer some affordances, and I think that they did a really, really good job picking their battles in a way that it feels like. I remember as a kid, I never would have told you, like, oh, you see, they're like, realistically, I didn't have a choice here. No matter what, when I passed this point, I was going to be Big Mario. It wasn't until I was in my 30s and with a fair amount of video game knowledge and looking at this game, trying to critique it, that I was like, I see what you did there, sneaky.
Well, and I think it's worth recognizing that the fact that a power-up always gives you 1 additional hit. So if you are small Mario and you get the mushroom, you can now get hit once before you die. And if you are small Mario and you get the fire flower, it only makes you Big Mario, but the important thing is that you can only get hit once before you die. If when you had the fire flower, you went to Big Mario, then to small Mario, you've widened the range of possible situations the player might be in, like how many hit points they have when they enter a given scenario. And the way they counterbalance that, instead of saying, okay, under no circumstances are we going to give you an additional hit point, so you don't get Fire Mario, then Big Mario, then small Mario, then dead, you just get tall and short dead, right? And the way they plan around that is having the fire flower power up. It does not make you all powerful. Like it allows you to defend yourself a little bit better. But I mean, even the fireballs themselves, like there can only be a couple on the screen at a time. They sort of bounce in an annoying way, and you have to like think about that when you aim them. Sometimes they just bounce right over an enemy and you just totally miss and you feel like an idiot. Yep. But if it also gave you an additional hit point, you would makes some of those challenges harder to account for players who showed up at that area with the additional hit point, which would make them disproportionately harder for people who only were small Mario when they got to that area. So I think balancing out the value of the Fire Flower with the fact that you don't get the additional hit point makes it's really solid. Like, it's really mechanically solid, and it allows them to build challenges that are, they know the two scenarios you're going to enter that room as. You're either small or big. If you're small, can you get a thing that makes you big, or maybe get through the challenge easier? And if you're big, is the challenge proportional for the fact that you can take one damages, to proceed through the encounter? So it's just, it's smart. It's really smart.
Oh, yeah. No, it really is. And I mean, and also the fact that, and not to, and one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk a lot about this mechanic is because, I've listened to a lot of people who, we're not the first people to talk about Mario, right?
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. Mind blown, world over. So this is just something that I haven't heard a lot of people speak about too much, because I've seen a lot of videos on it. But so not only is it nice because the fact that, so if the Fire Flower gave you an extra hit point, that is widening the skill gap between a skilled and an unskilled player, and that's what challenges you can give them. Because if an unskilled player is walking in, they could be at 1/3 the advantage as far as just getting through the scenario versus like the most skilled player, right? Not only that though, but I realized as we were playing is that, let's take I'm blanking on the name, Arthur, Knights, it's an old NES game.
Was it like Knights of the Round?
No, you start off in your underwear, and then you can get like armor and then gold
Ghost
armor.
and Goblins?
Thank you. Yes. That was going to bother me if I could. Yes, I was like, super, super popular game, Ghosts and Goblins, right? Similar power-up system, right? In the sense that, like, you get a thing, can take more hits, right? Here's why I think that Mario is more elegant, right? Because that's all that the mushroom really does theoretically on a top-level glance, right? Is it gives you an additional hit point, right? Being smaller is advantageous, though. It makes you harder to hit.
Yes.
So it's actually not unlike Ghosts and Goblins, where it's like there is no disadvantage to having the armor. It just gives you an extra hit point, right? With this one, having that extra hit point is good. It means you can take a hit, right? So that is definitely a good thing. However, it makes you more likely to take that hit.
Yeah,
which again,
twice as likely, because you're like literally twice the size.
Exactly. So so again, it just keeps drawing the gap between a skilled player and an unskilled player tighter and tighter, which makes it easier and easier to develop for, which I think is just because I remember there were a couple of times I think both of us at one point, because we played through a couple of times. I think the first time we played through, we just said, how fast can we beat the game? And so we warped to level 4 and then warped to level 8, which, by the way, we got to talk about basically what it equips to a level select screen.
Yeah.
Right. But then I remember for one of our playthroughs, we both went through small like 80% of the time. And there were a couple times where I was just like flying through there, and I was just kind of like, oh man, like where I missed somebody by that hair of a pixel. And I was like, if I was big, that would have knocked me down.
Yep.
And so it's just, it's brilliant the way that they do that. But yeah. So do you want to talk about the level select screen?
So I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about what is essentially a new game plus, because this is like one of my beefs with the video game industry. But let's talk about the level select screen first.
Yeah. So yeah, basically the way they do the level select screen, the level select in this is brilliant, right? Because in any other game, right, they might say like, well, once you beat it, you can just pick whatever level you want to play as and
passwords or whatever.
Right. But this one, instead, they said, no. First, you always have to play level 1-1, but you can skip 80% of it, right? And then in level 2-1, you can skip 90% of that by getting...
1-2.
Yeah, sorry, level 1-2. You can skip 90% of that by just beating a hole into the ceiling and then running across the entire ceiling, and then you can choose between worlds 2, 3, and 4, right? And then if you go to level 4, right? So far out of the game, you've played like 5% of it, right? Yeah. And if you jump to level 4, you get through level 4, and then in this world 4-2, that gives you it gives you the rest of them, right? It gives you
Yeah,
Uh,
there's one warp that you can warp yourself into a corner where you can't jump to the end from there. But then
that's what it is.
there's the other
Sorry,
one
no,
that's like 5 or 6, 7, 8 or
it's 6, 7, and 8 because that's the
yeah.
thing is if you do the exact same thing that you did in World 1, 2, it will give you level 5. If you do the but if you get to see other secret, right,
Mm-hmm.
then it gives you 6, 7, and 8.
Right.
Those are all of the levels. All you have to have done is played them well enough to have earned the ability to bamf around wherever you want, right? Yeah. So once you, the player, figure out the mechanical password to unlock the level select screen, it's unlocked to you forever. I didn't have to like go through, play another password, look them up online, anything like that. Like the passwords are in my head because they're mechanics based, not like just like administrative based, and it's good. It's good.
Yeah, I like that, and I like that it was very. When I say New Game Plus, I'm being pretty generous, but it was very typical of Nintendo era games, and Ghost and Goblins is actually a good example because Ghost and Goblins was like, hey, you beat the game, beat it again. and like that's what you actually have to do to get like the proper ending. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Super Mario Brothers, you get to 8-4 and you kill Bowser. It's actually Bowser this time, and then you get to the princess instead of a toad flicking you off, and you say like, hey princess, I'm here to save you, and she's like, cool, I have another thing I want you to do. It's a lot like the first thing, but different in like just a couple of ways. And like there's a few different like enemy placements. I think a few of the power-ups are in like slightly different places. Like it's almost the same game, but it's like a little bit harder because like
the most noticeable thing is that all of the Goombas are replaced with beetles.
Right, which unlike Goombas, when you jump on them, they don't disappear. They bounce around like turtles, so they continue to be a threat even after you have ostensibly, killed them. They can still kill you back. And and that may change depending on the kind of player you are. Like maybe you're used to killing a Goomba and then standing in this area and waiting to like make a long jump or something. Can't do that with the little Beetle Baileys like marching around. So that small change may completely change the gameplay for someone. And the reason this is important to me as like a meta-analysis of gaming is New Game Plus should exist in basically every game. There is very, very few games that should not have a New Game Plus. Like even if they could do it, they shouldn't do it because why not? Like why would you not take this incredibly easy road to extra playability of your game? Like every RPG at the end should let you start at the beginning, either with all your stuff or all your levels, or you unlock stuff faster or something. Like all of them should do that. Like give me a reason to reread the book I literally just finished reading, right? I mean like Fight Club is a good example of like I don't know about the original book, but like the movie, like when Fight Club ends the first time, the first thing you think is, well, crap, I want to rewatch it and see if I can pick out all the scenes where I should have noticed that the narrator was alone and that he's actually been Tyler Durden all along. #spoilers, right? Yeah. So if you can bake that into your game where literally the first thing the princess does is say, that was neat, do it again. And you're like, oh man, like what? Because she calls it a new quest. Like we give you a new quest. And you only have to walk 6 feet in World 1-1 before you see that the Goomba has been replaced by Beetle Bailey, and you're like, stuff is different. Like now I want to play through the rest of the game and see what else is different. Like are other things different? Is it just this? How big of an impact is this going to have? Like it's I don't know how difficult it is programmatically. My gut instinct is it's not overwhelmingly difficult, and the return on investment seems super high.
Well, especially with like, the Mario with this one in particular, is it was just basically, like you said, it's all of the levels were exactly the same, right? So basically all they had to do on the first broad sweep was just, like make all enemy A into enemy B. Okay. Now, then they probably just went and made a quick pass and said like, okay, now make this, instead of being a coin box, make it, like a power up, or make it a multi-coin box or whatever, like, and then they just went through change. And because most of that, I think it's like, like, because they didn't ever put something where there wasn't something already. They just changed what it was. So
Right.
instead of saying like this is item A, it's like now this is if game 2, then all item A's become item B's, or what have you. Like, yeah, no, it's gotta be super easy to do. I mean, because when you said like all games should do it, I was like, no, I mean, like, because my first thought was like, well, what about super narrative heavy games? But then the first one that comes to mind is The Last of Us, and they totally have a new game plus, and it's fun.
Yeah, and granted, programmatically, the new game plus in Last of Us is probably not that much more difficult, but it is more difficult to plan around because the new game plus in Last of Us is specifically built into the balancing, because you cannot, no matter how hard you play, you cannot become the maximally powered up Joel in one playthrough. It takes at least, I think, 2, maybe even 3 if you want to power up all the weapons all the way. But you want that. Like, especially if you play on a harder difficulty, it is really satisfying to go back through and be like, nah, I got maximum listening distance, I got maximum health, I got maximum healing speed, and all my guns are super powered, so the second I get them, I'm like friggin' Annie Oakley with this pistol. Like, that's really, really satisfying, but you also have to make sure that the first playthrough is possible and that the last playthrough is not so easy that it's boring, right? Whereas with a game like Mario, where you just say like, oh, hey, some of the enemies are different, and that's going to make some of your playthrough different. Like, that's, I think, easier to design for, and it's definitely easier to program in. And the thing about a new game plus, and this is why it always annoys me when a game that should have a new game plus doesn't have one, is I'm like, you know what? How bad could your new game plus possibly have been that it was better to leave it out? Because if you don't like the new game plus as a player, or you just never even know that it's there, is the game fine? Is the new game fine? Because I can ignore the plus, or I might never even discover it. But to just say like, yeah, we could have let you start over with all your levels and items, but we didn't. I'm like, oh, okay.
I mean, like, literally, even if like the new game plus is just like you said, you start over with all of your levels and items, and you're basically a god, and you one hit kill everything. You're like, it'll be fun, Like, I mean, to be fair, you may not play through the whole 80-hour RPG. You may play for only 5, but that's 5 more hours than you got otherwise. And honestly, when Peach was like, new game plus, I was like, yeah, let's do this thing. And I think we played it for a while, and then I think we both said like, we need to stop and go like hard reset and play the original again, because we were writing down too many notes based off of what is essentially not the core game,
right?
And so that's how playable and enjoyable it is. But I don't know what else you got for controls. The controls, obviously. I mean, the controls are just, they're super tight. I mean, I don't know what else you'd say to that. Like, they're super responsive. They work really well. They let you do the adjusting your jump in midair, as all non-horror platformers should. I mean, the controls are just, they're good. I don't know really what else there is to say about that.
No, I mean, again, master's class, but I think we've arrived at, does it hold up? And like so many incredibly positive game experiences, we obviously have been gushing about it for over an hour, but I think the significant thing about this question with a game of this type is not like, oh, is it as good as you remember? Why, yes, I enjoyed it quite a bit. Har, har, har. And we've talked about this a couple other times, but this game, among some of the train wrecks we've played, I think this puts a very fine point on, when you look at a game like Call of Duty 87, or even friggin' Super Mario Odyssey, like the newest Super Mario, is like, it's 3D. There's crap going on. You got a hat that eats people's brains. Like, it's way more complicated. But I would confidently go to someone who has average or better, like, fine motor skills, like their thumbs work, and say to them like, hey, it's 2017. You would still probably enjoy Super Mario Brothers, even if you're not a gamer, because it's fun even today. And all of the stuff that makes it a classic, the reason it's, you can pick up the mechanics, the reason the visuals are so iconic, the reason the music is so iconic, all of that stuff has stayed true. So not only would I be confident recommending this to someone who played it as a kid, I'd be confident recommending this to someone who does not play video games.
Well, and I think that you hit it very, very aptly right there, which is that, and to bring the episode back to the beginning, which will just tickle me a little bit, is that this is a great game to increase game literacy. Which is to say that, like, if somebody, like you said, if somebody's never ever played any video games before, you don't want to start them off on Call of Duty or Assassin's Creed. I mean, as much as you want to, because you want them to have those experiences, the same way I want somebody to read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, it's not fair to start somebody who has never read before with a book of that caliber. You start them off with, some books that don't have nearly as much going on because they can't handle that, right? So this game, like you said, it's super, the mechanics are super easy to come across, the visuals are super easy to digest, the sound is enjoyable and it helps pull you into the experience and into the moment. This game and games like it are the ones where you say, start here. This is where your game literacy journey begins. And then play this one, play some other ones. And then once you've gotten some of that under your belt, now let's talk about some of these other masterpieces and masterworks, because you can see where they kind of came from. But you've built up the mechanics and skills to be literate in video games. So with all that being said, man, we had a good year. We brought it all together. And I swear to God, if you do not let me play Legend of Zelda, I will wreak a fiery vengeance upon this world.
Next episode, Zelda 2 Revisited.
Nope. That's it. I'm done. Nope.
The curtain falls. The music plays. The credits roll. Then it all fades to black. And you're left by yourself. The fanfare is gone. There's no player 2 there by your side to share victories won. But as you slowly progress down the hall to your bed, a few great events leak back into your head from the time that you spent traversing the land, battling evil, fighting the darkness, just sword in hand. Your memories creeping with the edge of a smile. You realize again what you lost for a while. You're gonna think back much less on how you saved the day than on all the experience gained. At the end of it all, gamers play what we play. Not for game over, but rather for what we take away. The world is sad, but who cares? We all know that that's not what you came for. Your next adventure's already in sight. You're all set to go. You're excited to see what's all wrong till it's right. And the world is saved. So you're more along for the ride. You're more along for the ride. You're more along for the ride. You're more along for the
Alrighty, Rue. Let's do this thing.
Alrighty, Roo.
Yeah. Have I never said that in your presence before?
You have. It's still weird.